we begin a new series of sermons that we've called Faith Under Pressure. For the next several weeks, we're going to be following the story of a man named Joseph. Now, this is not the dad of Jesus, Joseph. This is a Joseph from the book of Genesis. He's one of the first of what would come to be known as God's chosen people. And he has some pretty tough experiences. We're going to see those over the next couple weeks and explore where is God when things are tough, when times are tough, and how does our faith carry us through? So to give you a little bit of context about Joseph, let me show you a family tree. At the top of this family tree, you see Jacob. Here's going to be your first little bit of thing that you need to remember. Jacob is also called Israel. So when I read the scripture, you may hear him referred to as Israel. That's where the name of the country comes from, is this guy, Jacob. Jacob has two wives, Leah and Rachel, and he has a favorite. And he's clear that he has a favorite. His favorite is Rachel. Rachel and Leah, they both have maidservants. And with Jacob, altogether, they have a lot of children. And one of the children that is with Jacob and his favorite wife, Rachel, is his youngest and also favorite child, Joseph, who everybody knows is his favorite child. And in this little diagram, he's got like this fancy sort of multicolored robe. The scripture says, and it's translated variously as a coat of many colors or a long-sleeved robe, but basically he was Daddy's favorite, and Daddy gave him a special robe to wear. That sets the stage for the story that I'm going to read you today, which comes from Genesis chapter 37. It says Joseph, he's the one with the fancy robe and the favorite, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Okay, so he's also a tattletale, to make it fair. Now Israel, okay, so that's Daddy, loved Joseph more than any other of his children because he was the son of his old age, and he had made him a long robe with sleeves, fancy robe. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. And once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream that I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, and your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." Now we're going to find out that this is actually, these dreams are a gift from God and they actually tell the future, but on the other side, he's pretty pleased with this, and so he shares it. His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed going to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more because of his dreams and his words. So the dreams are bad enough, but his words just make it worse because he's using these dreams to fuel his own kind of vanity. So the story takes a turn at this point. They finally decide, the brothers, that they have had enough with him, and they're going to do something about it. When you shepherd in the land of Israel, there's not a whole lot of greenery around, and so shepherds have to move. They travel a lot to find enough for the sheep and the goats to eat. And so the Bible says that they've traveled a long ways away from where Dad is. They're a long ways away. The other brothers are out there, and they start talking about what they're going to do to Joseph the next time they see him, and they decide they're going to kill him. Well, here comes Joseph. Dad has sent him to check on the older brothers, and they see Joseph in the distance, and then they decide, yes, today's the day. We're going to kill him. We're going to take his robe, bring it back to Dad, and say a wild animal. Got it. Now they're talking a little more, and they're kind of plotting and planning, and Reuben, who's the oldest son, he says, "Well, guys, let's not kill him. Let's make some money off this deal. There's a dry well or a cistern, a big pit. Let's throw him in there. And there's traders that move through this area. It's a main sort of travel trade route. Let's wait till some come along and we'll sell him as a slave and we'll make some money off this deal. And we'll still tell Dad that wild animals killed him." So Joseph comes, they get him, they throw him in this pit, and aren't any traders there at the moment, so they go off a little ways and they're having dinner, talking about all that they're going to do. Now the Bible says Reuben actually plans to come back and rescue him later, but he's not saying this to the brothers. They're off having dinner, but while they're off having dinner, another group of people wanders by. They see this pit, and there's a guy down in there. being nice neighbors as they are, they thought, we should sell this guy and make some money. They actually find some traders who are passing by, they sell him, and the next thing you know, Joseph is on his way into slavery, and this caravan is not going to end until it gets to Egypt. Now we'll have to find out what happens to him when he gets to Egypt, and it actually gets a little worse for a moment, I'll let you know, but you'll have to find that out next week. But this week, where I want to stop is in the pit. Because sometimes life is the pits. Figuratively, and for Joseph, it literally, his life was in the pit. And it would be nice if we could know that somehow God and our faith makes a difference in that. That would be great, except when I read this story, the thing that is troubling to me is there seem to be no heroes. When I looked at the Bible, I want to find like the guy or the woman who does the right thing so I can say, oh, that's what I need to do. Or the one that makes a mistake and then redeems it because I can think, okay, well, when I make that mistake, then I can do the same sort of thing to redeem it. But when I look at this story, life is a mess. The situation is a mess. And the people and the family involved in it are a mess. And they are all a mess. We've got Joseph, who is this obnoxious 17-year-old teenager who has this great gift from God, but he uses it to fuel his own vanity. You have the other brothers who are planning his murder. You might stop and say, oh, well, wait a second. What about the oldest brother who said, let's not kill him, let's just sell him? Maybe, maybe there's something redemptive in that. And then, I mentioned in the Bible that said that his plan was to come back and rescue Joseph later and restore him to his dad. So, maybe he could be the hero that I could identify with in this story. So I got to doing a little more research and found out that rabbis have been reading these texts for thousands of years. And they said, well, traditionally the rabbinical response to Reuben, the older one, is that he had his own agenda in mind in returning Joseph to his dad. And let's bring up the family tree again, and I want to read you something that comes just a couple chapters earlier to explain why the rabbis say Reuben, over here, the oldest, may have had his own agenda. In Genesis 35, it says, while Israel lived in the land, so that's daddy, Jacob, while he lived in the land, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. Everybody got that? So rabbis say there was some bad blood between Dad and Reuben, and rescuing Joseph may have been his plan to sort of maybe get a little bit more in Dad's favor. So there really are, there's no like heroes in this. Everybody has messed up, including Joseph. And maybe you know what that's like. Sometimes to be in a situation where life is the pits, my family's a mess, I'm a mess, stuff has happened, they've done stuff, I've done stuff, the situation has been such that just everything is a mess. And so I come to this story thinking maybe this is not the kind of biblical story that you pick up to say, oh, humans, this is what you need to do. But maybe what this actually is, and I think this is what it is this is a story meant to be not about us and what we should do, but to teach us a little bit about who God is and what God does. And so I want to share a couple of things from this story where I find, even in this story where everything's a mess, I find encouragement. The first is, I step back and I remember that this is the family, these are the people that God chose to be God's people. Presumably, God went into this thing knowing that these folks were a mess. That they messed up, that they were selfish, that they had a tendency to feed their own vanity, that they would let their anger run away with them, that they were willing to do things within the family dynamics that shouldn't be done, and all of the rest. And God said, yep, those are the ones I want to work through. And if God makes those kinds of choices here, and we see in the rest of the scripture that God makes those kind of choices other places, there's a pretty good chance that those are still the kind of people that God is looking for today. People who are sometimes a mess, who sometimes make their own situation worse, who have families are a mess, who are in situations that are a mess. Those are the people that God chooses to work through. There's another thing that I think this story may be about, where I find encouragement, is ultimately as we read the whole story, which we'll be doing over the next several weeks, we find that this is a God who is patient. Right now, there's not a whole lot God can do with Joseph to make his situation better, because in part, the situation is what it is, and in part, Joseph is who he is. He's this kind of selfish, vanity, pursuing kind of person. And until that changes, there's not a whole lot God can do to make it better, because Joseph is going to live with the consequences of his decisions. But God doesn't leave him. God is hanging around waiting, because the situation will not always be the same. And God lives with this dream. You know, Joseph kind of dreams of a future. Well, God dreams of a future where Joseph isn't the same either. Where Joseph comes to that place where he chooses not to go after what he wants, but what God wants. And when that happens, God is going to be there ready to do something new. And in fact, we'll find out something incredible with Joseph for the sake of others. I was thinking about reading about this pit that Joseph was in, and I remembered a pit. I had the opportunity to travel to Israel back in the end of December, the beginning of January, and another pit that I saw there. I took a picture when I was there. It's a little hard to see with the lighting in this room, but all it is it's a hole in rock. So you can imagine, it's not a whole lot you'll see in the photograph that you can't imagine in your head. But this pit sits under the ground at the site of what used to be, in the time of Jesus, the chief priest's house. This pit was actually a holding cell, because in that period of time, the religious leader also had some civil authority, and they would occasionally arrest people. And the chief priest had under his house a pit that was used as a holding cell. This picture that I took of the pit is the holding cell where Jesus spent part of the night when he was arrested before his crucifixion. He was in the Garden of Gethsemane on Thursday night. He was arrested around about midnight, 1 in the morning on Friday. They bring the religious leaders together. They have a trial. They convict Jesus. They've decided they want to hand him over to the Romans to be crucified. But presumably, back then as today, it's maybe not a great idea to go to the Roman leader's door and wake him up at 2 in the morning and say, hey, we want you to take care of this. And so they throw Jesus in this holding pit where he spends several hours until the sun comes up and it's okay to take him to the Romans. And so we have Jesus in a pit, we have Joseph in a pit. In a sense, both it's because of their dreams that have landed them there. Joseph has one dream, and he uses it to fuel his vanity. Jesus has this dream of uniting people with God or drawing people closer to God, but when he starts sharing that dream, there's people that don't like that either, or the way it's going to happen, and so he also gets thrown into this pit. But here's this Jesus who knew that that's what was going to happen, but is hoping for the day when people turn and they change and say they want to be closer to God, even if that means changing the way they've done some things in the past, that they want that, and Jesus is willing to spend that time in the pit for the possibility of making that possible. It's this patient God. In fact, near this pit would have been the courtyard of the chief priest's house, and that is the place where one of Jesus' closest followers, Peter, followed when Jesus got arrested. He's hanging out in the courtyard of the chief priest's house while Jesus is on trial. So people recognize Peter and they say, hey, weren't you with this Jesus that we put on trial? And Peter denies at that moment that he even knows Jesus. This site of the pit and the place where Peter denied Jesus, it's all in the same area, and it's all these high sort of moments of human failure and God's patience in the midst of it, because God didn't abandon humanity. God didn't abandon Peter. And today, if you go to that site, there's still the pit underneath, but above, Christians from a long time ago have built a church. And I saw that for the first time, and I thought, why do you build a memorial to human temptation and failure? Why would you worship at a place like that? And it finally clicked that this memorial, this church, is not about who we are and our failures. It's about this patient God and And we want to worship God that even in the place of our deepest failures does not abandon us, but is with us. So I find encouragement in this story of Joseph. One, that God chooses to work with families and people that are messed up. Two, that God is patient. And then finally, when the day does change, when the situation changes, when the people change, that God, in God's patience, is ready to go do something amazing with it. I want to share with you a story from a friend of mine named Mark. I met Mark as a member of the Access community a number of years ago, and as we got to know each other better, he began to share some of his story and how he knows firsthand what it's like for life to be the pits, to have a situation that's not good, to make choices yourself that are not good, and for God to be patient and to take you through this. And he wrote a couple of years ago an email telling some of his story, and he's given me permission to share it with you this morning. He says, when I was young, my parents took me to church and had me baptized and put me in a Christian school. But when it came time for me to make my own decisions, I had to make a choice. And so I did what would become my way of life. I chose the easy path. I drank, did drugs, forgot about God, and I ran the show. But then things changed. I couldn't feel anything, no joy or hope. I was so afraid of being me that I lost who I was and would spend most of my life wearing a mask. My, quote, easier way led me to addiction, homelessness, mental hospitals, jails, and almost death. But that seed that my parents planted when they made me go to church was growing inside of me. So he continues to tell the story. Years go by, but this seed of faith that his parents planted in him stubbornly keeps growing. Mark eventually turns to AA and to church. His AA sponsors, a member of our church, introduces him to our church and to Access. Mark becomes an active part of the Access community. And as I said earlier, a couple years ago, he writes this email that I'm reading. And so from the perspective of a couple years when he's writing this, he says, this past week I had to go to the hospital. The first nurse I saw, of course, had to ask about my history. But now at this point in the story, I told her that I'd been sober for 13 years and I'm involved in an awesome church. He goes on to say, as I look back, I chose the wrong path, but God does not give up on us. And just a little mustard seed of faith can grow even in rocky soil. Now I'm careful about the things in my life because even today, I still want to choose that path that looks easier, but one thing has changed. The path with God may seem hard and long, but I know that God is always there to carry us through the tough spots. It took time in Mark's life for things to change, for him to change, but when he did, God was there, the patient God who was ready and waiting and to make Mark not only healthy and whole, but a person who would be a blessing to other people. We're going to see a similar story unfold with Joseph, and I'll tell you, it's going to get a little worse for Joseph before it gets better. But it will end in the same place with this God that is patient, this God that chooses to work in the midst of our messes and who never gives up